Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at cesj.org.
Hello, thanks for joining us again. I'm your host, Dave Hamill, and we've got a couple of things for you today, basically just coming from me personally. One is I want to start a new segment, hope to do it weekly. It's called the Plutocracy Story of the Week, where we highlight some of the insanity that goes on because of the concentration of money and power, and that includes government power as well as just money power in general, and how the super rich are able to influence government. And so more and more our country is becoming a plutocracy run by those with large amounts of money. And the story this week is about former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. There's a story in the New York Times where one of their reporters, Andrew Ross Sorkin, went to interview Mr. Volcker because he has a book coming out. Apparently he's 91 years old and not in good health, and he's got some things he wanted to get off his chest. And one of those is that he's afraid that our country is descending into the status of a plutocracy. And I think it's kind of interesting that he said that for several reasons, which I'll get into more. But apparently the book is going to be called Keeping at It, The Quest for Sound Money and Good Government. And it's interesting that that's what his goal is, good government. I think it would have been better to find a way to reduce the influence of government, because government by nature has a tendency to be not so good, in my opinion. But anyway, let's get into the article here. He says, the central issue is we're developing into a plutocracy. We've got an enormous number of enormously rich people that have convinced themselves that they're rich because they're smart and constructive, and they don't like government, and they don't like to pay taxes. Rich guys like to go hobnobbing wholesale. They can argue war and peace and poverty and everything else. But when you go to a school of public policy, you're not learning how to run the GD government. You're learning how to debate political issues. Today, Mr. Volcker is already starting to worry about the next financial crisis. Asked about the stability of the banks, he said, they're in a stronger position than they were. But the honest answer is, I don't know how much they're manipulating. That, he said, is the real challenge facing economic policymakers. Everybody talks about monetary policy, he said, but the lesson of all this is we need better, stronger supervisory powers. So that's pretty much his solution to the fact that we're descending into a plutocracy, is better government, better regulation, and stronger supervision. I think he really missed the boat somewhere along the way. I believe he probably had the best opportunity to make a significant change of all of the Federal Reserve chairmen because of who was president at the time when he was chairman, and that is Ronald Reagan. He talks a little bit about his experience with Ronald Reagan, that Reagan had asked him to not raise rates or ordered him not to or whatever, which I guess, he's being negative about President Reagan. Apparently, President Reagan took him to a room that wasn't being recorded when he had someone else tell him not to raise rates. He thinks that was a little bit of a scheme on Reagan's part. But I think, knowing the fact that Ronald Reagan is on record supporting the Industrial Homestead Act, which was the original name for what we now call Capital Homesteading proposal, odds are, at some point in their conversations, President Reagan would have brought that up, and I'm sure Paul Volcker would have studied it. And they might have had plenty of pushback from large bank shareholders or whoever it is that pulls the strings. But I sincerely believe if these two highly influential men had appealed to the public on a regular basis about industrial homesteading or binary economics or capital homesteading, that enough people would have paid attention, that there would have been a dialogue about it, especially in the media and academia, and it would have gotten done. So, kind of disappointed to read about Paul Volcker and his sort of return to the same old solutions that haven't helped us. And thinking about the opportunity that he had in working with President Reagan, for some reason, Reagan did not continue to publicly advocate the solution that we believe would have been the best one. So, something along the way, I guess political consultants or donors, someone wanted to continue Keynesian economics. So anyway, that is our Plutocracy Story of the Week. So next I wanted to get into my journey to capital homesteading. This week we actually had a email exchange with a sometime follower of the Just Third Way named Chris, who I guess had found an article that I had participated in back in 2012. I was actually looking back through my emails, and it looks like I first heard about capital homesteading at the end of 2010. And by 2012, I was pretty involved with trying to promote the idea. And one of the things that I did was to communicate with the Huffington Post, and they were nice enough to offer to post an article or an essay that I wrote. And they edited it some, and we actually have cleaned it up a little since then, but I thought it'd be nice to go back over and read it because, it was catching someone's attention, and it was a good description of sort of where I was in my life when I was thinking about these issues for the first time, and I came across the capital homesteading proposal. So it's a good way for you to see what this podcast is about in terms of my history and where I'm coming from. And also, I don't think I've ever actually stated what I believe capital homesteading is, an actual definition of it. So it kind of does that too. So I'm just going to read the article. And again, I have edited it just a little, especially with the help of Dawn Brohan, because she's good at putting things in the official format. So this was called My Journey to Capital Homesteading. It was an essay that was published in the Huffington Post on October 26th of 2012. So right about 6 years ago, as the time we're reading this. As a matter of fact, One of the things that happened to bring me to studying this stuff happened exactly 10 years ago, and that is the financial crisis. It's kind of a 10-year anniversary of that. Anyway, I'll go ahead and read this. And as I read this, I wanted to mention that I had worded it to appeal to progressives, because that is who mostly reads the Huffington Post. So I would have written it a little bit differently if I was trying to appeal to conservatives. But I'll talk about that a little bit more on the way. So here we go. The article is My Journey to Capital Homesteading, and that's an essay by me, Dave Hamill, published in the Huffington Post, October 26, 2012. And so that was right about 6 years ago. So here's the article. The Internet is bringing great ideas to the forefront, paving the way for progress. More than ever, each individual has access to information that can help bring enlightenment and change. My personal epiphany came when I discovered an economic reform proposal called Capital Homesteading. I had a successful business that was vulnerable to economic boom and bust cycles, the worst of which was 2008. Resulting reduced business activity gave me time to study and think about what, if anything, I could do to try to help reduce this trend. I began to realize that most of our problems can't be blamed on liberals or conservatives, but more often on corruption. In my research, I found validation for the axiom that says, when investigating an impropriety, follow the money. I now believe that generally, the entire world's system of money, currency, and banking is one big exploitative scam. Central banks, including our Federal Reserve, are currently set up to benefit the too-big-to-fail Wall Street banks, the tiny elite who own and control the large corporations, and the self-serving politicians who pass laws to keep the system in place, with Main Street businesses and the citizens last. The now infamous bailouts are proof and have caused more people to realize something is wrong. YouTube videos like those from the Zeitgeist movement and Bill Still outline the problem very well, but the solutions they propose seem to fall short. Zeitgeist/Venus Project has interesting futuristic proposals, but moves too drastically from our principles of individual liberty, property rights, and freedom of religion. Bill Still's greenback philosophy was very interesting to me, as was Ron Paul's metal standard with elimination of the Fed. But I could not knee-jerk react to the complex problem without thorough research of unintended consequences. For example, metals can be hoarded by the financial class. Bureaucrat-empowering greenback quantities would need to be limited to avoid inflation and devaluation, which puts a cap on growth. So I began to read books, which have revealed more problems with all well-known proposals. They fall short of important requirements. Complete breakup of the effective plutocracy, preservation of individual liberty and property rights, rapid empowerment of all citizens, including the poor, without redistribution, ending the fractional reserve debt-based boom and bust scam, and even inflation, but providing robust, sustainable, and environmentally sound growth while we're at it. Oh, and it should be bipartisan implementable and already have an organized movement. Whew! Can such a miracle reform plan exist? I say yes. But you should try to disprove this claim yourself. Perhaps in doing so you will read one of the books I labored through. It was a massive volume about the Fed called Secrets of the Temple by William Grider. He briefly mentioned the monetary and economic theories of a successful lawyer-economist named Louis Kelso, who started the employee ownership movement. That grabbed my attention. Several businesses I know have ESOPs and excel with happier, career-oriented employees. I searched the internet and found that although Kelso is no longer with us, his former Washington lawyer, Dr. Norman Kurland, is, and heads a thought-provoking nonprofit called the Center for Economic and Social Justice, CESJ.org. I emailed them with a few excited questions, and to my surprise, Norm himself called me. Everything he said made sense to me. It was like the monetary planets and economic stars all aligned. I learned that their main proposal to correct our flawed banking and monetary system is called Capital Homesteading. Instead of fractional reserve loans to multiple layers of banks putting non-asset-backed currency into our economy, citizens would receive every year a scientifically calculated increase in new capital formation divided by population, equal allotment of credit to invest in the new growth shares of dividend-paying corporations. That is an oversimplified explanation, and there are many more facets to our plan, including a proven method of making the exact quantity of money available to the economy through something called the banking principle. But finding out more is the fun part, and I helped create a website to make that process easier, capitalhomestead.org, where we are growing a coalition. And CESJ, the Center for Economic and Social Justice, is the source of the plan, and you can access our extensive online library at cesj.org. Bottom line, everyone seems to know that wealth disparity is a big problem. The statistics agree. Looking at the year and the ratio of people at poverty to wealthy level, in 1820, there were 3 people in poverty to every 1 person in a state of wealth. In 1913, it was 11 to 1. By 1950, 35 to 1. And 2005, 67 to 1. So as you see, there are becoming more and more drastic problems with wealth disparity, with so many more people in a poverty state than in a wealthy state. And I have updated this number since it was written in 2012. Another number came out, which was in 2013. So it is worse. The 2013 number is 88 to 1. And you can look up these numbers, hdr.undp.org. That's a agency of the United Nations. So getting back to the article, what other proposal not only focuses on correcting this, but also offers conservatives something to support? Smaller government. Yes, that's what I said. And I know many progressives don't want to hear that. Why did it once make us think JFK, but now it's LOL? Actually, although a majority of capital homesteading supporters seem to be from the liberal/progressive camp, I am not. I must confess. But I do have a family heritage of Southern Democrats, like my uncle, who was a well-respected lawyer and judge. He taught me much about justice, and that should be what unites us. So I hope you can acknowledge one principle that has potential to do just that. Power tends to concentrate, so steps need to be taken to compensate. You may quickly agree, Money power has concentrated in the top 1/10 of 1% who own and control the Walmarts, big oils, hedge funds, and the aforementioned Wall Street banks of today's world. But what if, in addition to capital ownership, government power also tends to concentrate? A footnote here is that I think progressives are critical of the way money power tends to concentrate and grow, and conservatives are critical of the way government power does so. And a good strategy is to show these groups why both concerns are important. Back to the article. As you contemplate that, consider a scenario where everyone builds a solid private retirement nest egg as a right of citizenship, receiving dividend income throughout their lives. Wouldn't that be an improvement? Then, could phasing out inefficient government programs like Social Security work for you? This is how solidarity against concentrated power can finally free us from the gridlock demons that haunt us. Own or be owned. That's how I ended it. So, I enjoyed writing that. That was a time of my life when I had some time. I was working a job where I was getting paid to sit. So I had time to write articles. I need to get back to that. But, of course, working on the podcast takes time, too. So it's a lot of fun just trying to do a little something here and there to spread the word about Capital Homesteading, the Just Third Way, and CESJ, and ways to actually transform society, because it really is getting ridiculous. I mean, there are trends throughout history where, a few people end up controlling everything, and then there's a revolution. And unfortunately, it's usually bloody. So I think it's our duty to try to make the change this time. As we look at these numbers, this ratio of poverty to wealthy, I mean, it's just crazy. And as we look at this happening, something drastically different has to be done. It's just the old thing they say, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. I think we just have to say our economic system does not work. It's okay to be able to work and do better than others, but a ratio of 88 people in poverty to every one in wealth, that's just insane. And there's a lot of other statistics that are just crazy like that. So something's going to happen. Enough people are going to say they've had enough. So hopefully it will be a peaceful, intelligent change and not a disastrous one. And that's what I am calling everyone to be a part of. So thank you for listening, and here are the ways you can get involved. You can join CESJ by going to cesj.org and clicking on Participate, and you can become a paying member for $25 per year, and also a student membership is $15 per year, and that qualifies you for discounts on our materials, such as books, which you can buy many of and distribute to your friends and family. And also, if you'd like to participate and comment on the podcast, feel free to call. I have a voicemail set up. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'll play it on the podcast. The number is 678-719-2840. Own or be owned.